She was just the new assistant, but the billionaire wanted something only she could give him. She walked into his life as an obligation, discreet, proper, perfectly replaceable, but a single shared glance was all it took for everything to spiral out of control. She was different. She didn't fear him, she didn't flatter him, and without knowing it, she began to invade every space he had sworn to keep untouchable. He was power, control, solitude. She was the first real threat to the wall he had built, and there, between cold commands and silences that screamed volumes, a love that you don't choose began. It only consumes. Sorry to interrupt your story, but if you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe. Bless this channel by helping us grow, and may God multiply it back to you twofold. Thanks, and enjoy the video. In the pulsating heart of New York City, amid the constant hustle and the skyscrapers that challenged the clouds, stood the Blackwood Tower, headquarters of Blackwood Holdings, one of the most powerful corporate conglomerates in the country. On the top floor, where the air was as exclusive as the mahogany furniture and marble floors, was the office of Damian Blackwood, a man whose fortune was surpassed only by his reputation. At 42, Damian had not only multiplied his family's inheritance, but had built an empire of his own, at the cost of personal relationships and broken hearts. Stories circulated through the company's corridors about his fleeting romances with his personal assistants, beautiful women who lasted in the position only as long as his interest did. On that October morning, as the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the executive floor, an unfamiliar figure walked through the glass doors. Valentina Rossi walked with firm steps, a leather portfolio under her arm, and a serene expression on her face that contrasted with the usual nervousness of those entering this territory for the first time. "Good morning, I'm Valentina Rossi, Mr. Blackwood's new executive assistant," she announced in a clear voice to the receptionist, who looked at her with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "You?" she asked, not hiding her astonishment as she scanned her from head to toe. She wasn't the type of woman Damian usually hired. Valentina wore a dark grey pantsuit, her black hair pulled back in a severe bun, and while her features were harmonious, she wore no makeup other than a discreet lipstick. She wasn't the bombshell beauty everyone was used to. "Human resources should have informed you of my arrival," Valentina replied professionally, unfazed by the scrutiny. Minutes later, as she was guided to her new desk located opposite Damian's office, she could feel the employees' stares. The murmurs soon followed. "Is this the new victim? She won't last 2 weeks. What could Damian possibly see in her?" Valentina simply ignored the comments. She had taken the job because the pay was exceptional, and she had medical debts to settle after her mother's illness. The job was her only priority. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doors of the private elevator opened, and Damian Blackwood made his entrance. Tall, athletic, with jet black hair peppered with silver at the temples and amber eyes that seemed to assess everything with pinpoint precision. He wore a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than most of his employees' monthly salaries. Upon seeing her, he stopped short. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," Valentina greeted, standing up. "I'm Valentina Rossi, your new executive assistant. Here is your schedule for the day, your pending calls, and the contracts that require your immediate review." Damian took the documents she handed him without a word, studying her intently. He was used to his assistants greeting him with flirty smiles, veiled compliments, and glances that promised more than work efficiency. "Any previous experience in similar positions?" he finally asked, his tone suggesting he doubted her abilities. 5 years as an executive assistant at Sterling Financial Group and 3 years at the law firm Ortega & Associates," she answered without hesitation. "I'm fluent in 3 languages and have an MBA. A faint smile touched Damian's lips, more out of disbelief than pleasure. "Let's see how long you last, Valentina," he muttered before entering his office. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. To everyone's surprise, including Damian's, Valentina proved to be the most efficient assistant he had ever had. She anticipated his needs, solved problems before they arose, and diplomatically handled even the most difficult clients. But what truly unsettled Damian was her indifference. While every other woman in the company sought his attention, Valentina maintained an impenetrable professional distance. When he made personal comments, she skillfully redirected the conversation to work matters. When he tried to provoke a reaction with his proximity, she remained unperturbed. One afternoon, while they were reviewing an important contract together, Their hands accidentally brushed. Damien noticed she pulled hers away as if the contact had burned her. "Do I make you uncomfortable, Valentina?" he asked with a deliberately suggestive tone. "Not at all, sir. I simply prefer to keep our relationship strictly professional," she replied without looking up from the document. That answer, far from offending him, awakened something he hadn't felt in a long time: genuine curiosity. He was used to getting everything with a snap of his fingers, to women falling at his feet, captivated by his power and charm. Valentina's indifference was uncharted territory, a challenge that intrigued him more each day. He began to watch her when she wasn't looking. The way she lightly bit her lower lip when she concentrated, her customary cinnamon tea at 11 in the morning, the small photograph of an older woman, probably her mother, that she kept in her desk drawer. One night, working late on an urgent project, Damien found her in the office kitchenette making coffee. "Why did you take this job, Valentina?" he asked, startling her. She looked at him directly for the first time, without the professional barrier she usually maintained. "Because I need the money, Mr. Blackwood, like most people who work for a living." "You could have chosen any company. Your company offered the best salary," she replied frankly. "And contrary to what everyone thinks, I'm not concerned with your reputation. I'm not interested in being anything more than your assistant." Damien felt a pang of something akin to disappointment, mixed with a growing respect. "So much honesty is refreshing," he admitted. "Honesty shouldn't be refreshing, sir. It should be the standard." With that simple sentence, Valentina had put into words what was missing in Damien's world, surrounded by sycophants and opportunists. As he watched her return to her desk, her posture erect and her stride firm, something stirred within him. For the first time in years, Damien Blackwood found himself thinking about a woman beyond fleeting desire. The tension between them was palpable, but different from anything he had experienced before. It wasn't just sexual, though there was an element of that. It was a tension born of respect, of curiosity, of finding something authentic in a world of falsehoods, and this was just the beginning. A month after Valentina's arrival at Blackwood Holdings, Damien had realized that his usual seduction tactics wouldn't work on her. Every morning, as the sun lit up the bustling expanse of Fifth Avenue, he would plot new strategies to break down the wall of professionalism she had built between them. One Thursday afternoon, while they were reviewing the latest financial reports, Damien suddenly closed his laptop. "I have an important dinner meeting tonight at Per Se," he announced, mentioning one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. "I need you to accompany me to take notes and ensure we don't miss any crucial details." Valentina looked up from her documents, her expression a mix of surprise and skepticism. "Should I have someone from the legal department join us as well?" she asked, trying to keep her tone professional. "That won't be necessary," he replied with a barely perceptible smile. "I only need my personal assistant. I'll pick you up at 8. Before she could protest, Damien had already left the office, leaving her with the distinct feeling that this was not really a business meeting. Valentina got home with just enough time to change. She chose a conservative black dress, the most formal one she owned, trying to decipher her boss's true intentions as she applied light makeup. At 8 o'clock sharp, the buzzer of her modest East Village apartment rang. When she opened the door, she found Damien impeccably dressed in a custom-made dark blue suit. For a moment, their eyes met in silence. "Who else will be attending this meeting?" she asked directly as they went down in the elevator. "No one," he replied casually. "The investor cancelled at the last minute, but we already had the reservation. It would be a shame to let it go to waste." The restaurant welcomed them with the warmth of candlelight and the aroma of the finest contemporary American cuisine. The table, strategically placed in a private corner, offered a privileged view of the illuminated city. There were no folders, no documents, no indication that this was a business dinner. "This isn't a work meeting, is it?" Valentina said after the waiter had served their wine. Damien looked at her directly, dropping his facade for the first time. "No, it's not. I wanted to get to know you outside of the office. Is that so terrible?" "It's not terrible," she replied calmly, "but it is dishonest. I would have preferred you to be direct with me, Mr. Blackwood." "Damien," he corrected her. "And you're right. I apologize." The evening unfolded with conversations that, surprisingly, had nothing to do with work. Damien discovered that Valentina had grown up in a small town in upstate New York, that she loved classic American literature, and that she had sacrificed her own doctoral studies to care for her sick mother. For the first time in years, he found himself genuinely interested in someone else's words. The next day, a simple, elegant bouquet of white calla lilies appeared on Valentina's desk with a handwritten note. "Thank you for a memorable evening. Next time, no pretenses." She tucked the note into her purse, trying to ignore the curious glances of her colleagues and the slight blush she felt on her cheeks. The following weeks brought an escalation in Damien's attempts. Tickets to Carnegie Hall, invitations to exclusive events, even a proposal for a weekend in the Hamptons to discuss future projects. Valentina rejected each offer firmly, but it was becoming harder to maintain her resolve. One morning, upon arriving at her building, she found a gleaming silver Audi A5 parked at the entrance. A uniformed driver handed her the keys along with a card. "To prevent you from being late when we work late, no strings attached." This time, Valentina stormed into Damien's office. "I can't accept this," she said, tossing the keys onto his desk. "Why not?" he asked with feigned innocence. "It's practical and safe." "Because we both know what it means," she retorted, holding his gaze. "I've seen how this works, Mr. Blackwood. First it's flowers, then dinners, then extravagant gifts. And when the girl finally gives in, the interest fades, and a new assistant appears. I won't be part of that cycle." Damien rose from his chair and walked around the desk, stopping dangerously close to her. "What makes you think you're like the others?" he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "The fact that you're using the same tactics on me," she replied without backing down, though she could feel her heart racing. For a moment it seemed Damien would close the distance between them, but Valentina took a step back, establishing an invisible barrier. "My respect is not for sale, Mr. Blackwood. Not for a car, not for jewelry, not for empty promises." Instead of being annoyed, a genuine smile spread across Damien's lips. "You truly are one of a kind, Valentina Rossi." The tension between them had taken on a new dimension. It was no longer just the boss pursuing his assistant. It was a man discovering, perhaps for the first time, that some things couldn't be bought. The following days were marked by a strange dance of approach and retreat, glances that lasted a second too long, fingers that accidentally brushed when exchanging documents, silences heavy with unspoken words. During the afternoons they worked alone. During an important presentation, Valentina leaned in to point out an error in the projected numbers. Her perfume, a subtle scent of vanilla and jasmine, enveloped Damien. He closed his eyes briefly, fighting the urge to lean closer. She noticed and discreetly pulled back, maintaining her professional composure. But that night, in the solitude of her apartment, she allowed herself to remember the intensity of his gaze, wondering for the first time if she was fighting against him alone or also against her own emerging feelings. Damien, for his part, was in an unfamiliar situation. Accustomed to always getting what he wanted, Valentina's resistance only intensified his fascination. It wasn't just desire he felt now. It was a complex mix of admiration, respect, and a growing need to show her that his intentions went beyond a simple whim. The line between professional and personal was blurring more each day, but Valentina remained firm in her position. It didn't matter how much her heart raced when he entered the room, or how her thoughts drifted to him at unexpected moments. She had learned through the painful experience of others that men like Damien Blackwood didn't change, and she was not willing to become another anecdote in his history of conquests. What neither of them knew was that the real challenge was just beginning. After weeks of rejection, frustration began to consume Damien. He wasn't used to his desires being thwarted, much less by someone who technically depended on him. If seduction tactics didn't work, there were other methods to break the resistance that so obsessed him. The strategy began subtly. On a Monday morning, Valentina found a pile of files on her desk that needed to be reviewed urgently. The next day, it was 3 presentations that needed to be completely reworked. On Wednesday, a meeting with Japanese investors was inexplicably moved up by 2 hours, forcing her to work through the night to have everything ready. "Are you finding the work difficult, Valentina?" Damien asked with feigned concern when he found her with dark circles under her eyes and a 3rd cup of coffee at 10 in the morning. "Not at all, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her dignity intact. "Everything will be ready on time." Damien's enigmatic smile confirmed what she already suspected. This was a test, perhaps even a punishment for her rejection. By Friday, Valentina had slept barely 12 hours all week. Her desk had become a fortress of documents, reports, and impossible deadlines. Still, she refused to show weakness or ask for help. This was a power play, and she was not going to lose. That night, as the Blackwood Tower emptied and the lights of New York City began to twinkle against a dark sky. Damien sent her a message from his office. "I need the complete analysis of the Apex project tonight. The investors are expecting my response first thing in the morning." It was the last straw. The Apex project was a multi-million-dollar real estate investment that required weeks of analysis, not hours. Valentina glanced at the clock. 9:45 p.m. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know if from too much caffeine, exhaustion, or sheer outrage. With firm steps, she crossed the hallway that separated her desk from Damien's office. Without bothering to knock, she threw the door open. He was sitting calmly, a glass of single malt scotch in his hand, as if he had been expecting her. "Is this some kind of sick game to you?" she snapped, closing the door behind her. "Do you think I don't realize what you're doing?" Damien watched her, fascinated by the fire in her eyes, by this unleashed version of the always composed Valentina. "Enlighten me," he responded with provocative calm. "You're abusing your power. You're punishing me because I wouldn't give in to your advances." She advanced until she was standing in front of his desk, her hands planted on the polished wood. "This is workplace harassment, Mr. Blackwood, and we both know it." He rose slowly, circling the desk until he was just inches from her. The tension in the air was almost palpable. "Do you know what this really is, Valentina?" His voice had softened, losing the authoritative tone he usually employed. "It's desperation." The confession caught her off guard, leaving her momentarily speechless. "I can't focus. I can't sleep," he continued, running a hand through his hair in an uncharacteristically vulnerable gesture. "I can't stop thinking about you, about your intelligence, your dignity, how you challenge me when everyone else just nods. Do you have any idea what that's like for someone like me?" Valentina took a step back, disarmed by this sudden sincerity. For the first time, she saw cracks in the armor of arrogance and control that Damien always wore. "I can't be just another one of your conquests," she murmured, her voice betraying her own internal confusion. "You're not." He moved closer again, this time gently, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "You never have been." Their eyes met in a silence charged with possibilities. For an instant, Valentina felt the urge to believe him, to give in to what her body had been screaming for weeks. Damien raised a hand to stroke her cheek, and she didn't immediately pull away. The contact sent an electric current through her skin, but then, like a flash, she remembered all the stories she had heard since her arrival. The assistant who lasted 3 months before being transferred to a branch office in Chicago, the marketing executive who resigned in tears, the young accountant who now avoided any event where Damien might be present. She took a step back, breaking the spell. "It wouldn't work," she said firmly, despite the tremor in her voice. "You'd get bored just like you always do, and I'd be left looking like a fool just like all the others." Damien's expression hardened again, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "You should go home," he said in a cold tone. "The Apex project can wait until Monday." Without another word, Valentina left the office, feeling that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer simply boss and assistant, playing a game of cat and mouse. They had seen too much of each other to maintain that pretense. The weekend passed in a state of inner turmoil. Valentina alternated between rage at Damien's manipulation and an uncomfortable attraction she refused to fully acknowledge. When Monday arrived, she steeled herself with determination. She would submit her resignation and find another job, far from this toxic dynamic. But when she arrived at the office, she found an unusually quiet atmosphere. Several workstations were empty, the desks cleared of personal belongings. Her confusion grew when she saw Lorena, the receptionist, packing her things into a cardboard box. "What's going on?" she asked, alarmed. "Restructuring, according to HR," Lorena replied bitterly. "All the women under 40 were let go this morning. Well, all of them except you." A chill ran down Valentina's spine as she processed the information. All the women? Was she the only one left? Dazed, she walked toward her desk where Damien was already waiting, impeccably dressed and with an unreadable expression. "Good morning, Valentina," he greeted her casually, as if nothing extraordinary were happening. "I need you to join me in my office. There's an urgent matter we need to discuss." In a complete state of shock, she followed him. The office, normally bustling with the sound of phones and conversations, now echoed with an unsettling silence. "What have you done?" she asked as soon as the door closed behind them. "Did you fire all those women because of—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. The idea seemed so absurd. "For efficiency," he completed. "This place needed a cleanup. Too many distractions, too much drama. Now we can focus on what really matters." "And what is it that really matters?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Damien approached her, this time without hesitation, with the confidence of someone who has made an irrevocable decision. "I need to get married, Valentina, and I want you to be my wife." The world seemed to stop around her as the words fell like stones into a calm pond, shattering all sense of reality. "What did you say?" she finally managed to articulate. "You heard me perfectly," he replied with an intensity that cut through the air. "I want you as my wife, and I won't take no for an answer." The empty office amplified every sound, the ticking of the wall clock, Valentina's ragged breathing, the rustle of Damien's expensive suit as he moved. A marriage proposal was the last thing she had expected, especially after such a display of power with the mass firing. "Have you lost your mind?" she finally managed, backing away until she hit the edge of the desk. "If this is another one of your manipulations—" "It's a business matter," Damien interrupted, his voice regaining the pragmatic tone he used in important meetings. "Please sit down. I need to explain something that very few people know." Against her better judgment, Valentina sat. The seriousness on Damien's face had changed. He was no longer the confident predator, but a man whose gaze was heavy with worry. "Blackwood Holdings was founded by my grandfather and his partner, Ernest Lombard, 60 years ago," he began, pouring himself a glass of water that he seemed to need more than he would admit. "When my father took over, the company nearly went bankrupt due to his mismanagement and gambling addiction. That's when a clause was established in the shareholder agreement." He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Valentina now recognized as a sign of vulnerability. "The clause stipulates that the company's CEO must be married by their 43rd birthday, or control will automatically pass to the heir of the Lombard family." "Why a clause like that?" Valentina asked, trying to process the information. "My grandfather believed marriage provided stability, that a married man would make more sensible decisions," he explained with a bitter smile. "It was his way of preventing my father's history from repeating itself. I turned 43 2 weeks ago, Valentina. The board has given me an ultimatum. Either I get married in the next 10 days, or Blackwood Holdings goes to Sebastian Lombard." "And that's why you fired all the women? To leave me as your only option?" Indignation returned to her voice. "No." The firmness in his reply surprised her. "I fired them because I didn't want you to think I chose someone else. Because you're the only one I trust for this." Valentina shot up from her chair, needing to move to sort through her thoughts. "Let me get this straight. You want us to get married for 10 days, so you can keep control of your empire," she summarized, disbelief lacing every word. "And then what? A quiet divorce? A generous settlement to buy my silence?" "Afterward," Damien hesitated, as if he hadn't truly considered the afterward. "Afterward. Whatever you decide. A divorce, if that's what you want. With an appropriate compensation, of course." "Of course," she repeated bitterly. "Everything comes down to money for you, doesn't it? Even something as personal as marriage." A heavy silence fell. Through the panoramic windows, the New York City skyline was visible, a constellation of lights that seemed as distant as the possibility of any of this making sense. "I thought," she began, her voice betraying a vulnerability she didn't want to show. "For a moment last night, when you said you couldn't stop thinking about me, I thought maybe you felt something real." Damien crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, taking her by the shoulders, with an intensity that startled her. "It is real," he affirmed, his amber eyes locked on hers. "Everything I told you is true, Valentina. I can't stop thinking about you. You're driving me crazy. But it's also true that I need this marriage to save my company. Both things are true." Valentina pulled away from his grasp, feeling the ground shift beneath her. It was all too much. The impossible workload, the confession from the night before, the firings, and now this absurd proposal. Her analytical mind, always her greatest ally, now felt like a chaos of conflicting emotions. "I need to get out of here," she murmured, picking up her handbag. "I can't think straight." "Valentina, please." There was genuine urgency in his voice. "I don't have much time." "Well, I need time," she replied, heading for the door. "And space." Without looking back, she walked out of the office, out of the building, out of that world of glass and steel where the rules seemed so different from the ones she had known her whole life. She walked aimlessly through the downtown streets, letting the city's noise envelop her, trying to drown out the turmoil of her own thoughts. She didn't return to her apartment that night. She knew Damien would look for her there. Instead, she took a bus up to the Hudson Valley where her cousin Elena lived. She needed physical distance to analyze what was happening objectively. The next few days were a whirlwind of missed calls and messages. Damien seemed to be going frantic, alternating between pleas and demands. "Please come back, we need to talk. Where are you? Everyone is looking for you. I can't lose the company, Valentina. It's all I have." On the third day, as she looked out over the rolling hills of the Hudson Valley with her cousin, she received a different message. "It's not just about the company. It's about you. Us. I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you. Please, come back." It was that message that finally made her decide. That afternoon she said goodbye to Eleanor and took the bus back to the city. Damien was waiting for her in her apartment. He had deep circles under his eyes and the beginning of a beard she had never seen on him before. When he saw her walk in, he jumped up from the sofa, visibly relieved. "I thought you weren't coming back," he said quietly. "I thought so too," she admitted, setting her small bag on the floor. "But here I am." "Does that mean—" "It means I have conditions," she interrupted, keeping a safe distance. "First, when this is over, I return to my position with a significant raise. Second, the women you fired will be rehired with compensation for the days they lost." Damien nodded, ready to agree to anything at that moment. "And third, the most important one," she continued, her voice firm despite the slight tremor in her hands. "During these 10 days of marriage, you cannot touch me. No physical contact, no trying to seduce me. It will be a strictly professional arrangement." Damien's expression clearly showed his internal conflict, but after a moment, he nodded again. "Agreed," he conceded. "But I have a condition too. Stop calling me Mr. Blackwood. If we're going to be married even for 10 days, we should at least be on a first-name basis, don't you think?" A small, involuntary smile touched Valentina's lips. "Agreed, Damien." His name on her lips sounded like a promise, like the beginning of something neither of them could fully foresee. For a moment, they just looked at each other, aware they were about to embark on a dangerous game where the rules could change at any moment. "When are we getting married?" she finally asked, breaking the spell. "Tomorrow," he replied. "There's no time to waste." The ceremony was as discreet as it was rushed. In a small room at the city clerk's office downtown, with only 2 witnesses, Damien's lawyer and a distant cousin of Valentina's, they signed the documents that made them legally husband and wife. She wore a simple cream-colored suit, he, one of his impeccable dark suits. There were no rings, no vows, no kiss. Just signatures on paper and a handshake that sealed the strangest business deal of their lives. "Welcome to your new home," Damien announced that afternoon, as the private elevator doors opened directly into a spectacular penthouse on the Upper East Side, the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. Valentina held her breath as she took in the space. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of Central Park, minimalist designer furniture, and original works by renowned artists like Pollock and Rothko. It was beautiful, but intimidating in its perfection. "My room is at the end of the hall," he explained, gesturing to the right. "Yours will be this one." He opened a door on the left, revealing a spacious bedroom with an ensuite bathroom. "I had some things brought over from your apartment, but if you need anything else—" "This will be fine," she interrupted, placing her suitcase on the king-size bed. "Thank you." An awkward silence settled between them. They were 2 strangers now sharing a roof, bound by a legal document and a secret. "The board meeting is tomorrow at 10, Damien finally said. "It will be our first public appearance as a couple." "I'll be ready," Valentina assured him, wishing for the first time to be alone to process everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. As if reading her thoughts, Damien gave a slight nod and headed for the door. "I'll have dinner sent up at 8, he said before leaving, "unless you'd prefer to go out." "Dinner here is fine," she replied, grateful for the space. The night passed in a strange calm as they shared a silent meal in the vast dining room, exchanging only what was necessary. 2 different worlds forced to coexist, each carefully measuring their words and gestures. The next day, the tension gave way to performance. As they entered the boardroom together, Damien surprised Valentina by gently placing a hand on her waist. She tensed for a moment, but remembered they were in public. They had to sell the idea of a real marriage, not a convenient contract. "Gentlemen, I'd like to introduce my wife, Valentina Rossi," he announced, a genuine pride in his voice. Or I should say, Valentina Blackwood. The shocked faces of the executives said it all. No one had expected the city's most eligible bachelor to suddenly get married, let alone to his assistant. Congratulations followed, some sincere, others laced with suspicion. During the presentation, Valentina watched Damien in his element. Dominant, charismatic, utterly confident. When one investor indirectly questioned the legitimacy of their union, he responded with a look filled with what seemed like authentic affection for her. Some people find love after years of searching. I was lucky enough to find it where I least expected it. In my own office, he said, his hand covering hers on the table. Sometimes the most valuable thing has been right in front of our eyes all along. The speech was so convincing that for a moment, even she believed it. The following days settled into a routine. They arrived at the office together, shared lunches at restaurants where they could be seen, and attended meetings where Damien proudly introduced her. In the evenings, they returned to the penthouse, where they each retreated to their private spaces, maintaining the agreed-upon distance. But living together began to erode the barriers. Small details seeped through the cracks in their armor. Damien discovered that Valentina read poetry before bed. She noticed he always left classical music playing softly while he worked in his study. They shared breakfast in silence, but a silence that gradually became comfortable, almost intimate. On the 5th day of their marriage, they had to attend an important charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Damien was waiting in the living room, checking emails on his phone when Valentina appeared. The silk red dress she had chosen hugged her curves perfectly, her usually pinned-up hair now falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Damien was speechless for the first time since she'd known him. "Do I look that bad?" Valentina asked, uncomfortable in his silence. "You look," he began, his voice huskier than usual. "There are no words." Throughout the gala, Damien barely left her side. His hand always found an excuse to graze her back, to intertwine with hers. To any observer, they were the perfect picture of enamored newlyweds. As they danced under the dim lights of the ballroom, the proximity became almost unbearable. The scent of her perfume, the warmth of his hand on her waist, the intense gaze that never left her eyes. Valentina felt every fiber of her being responding to him in ways her rational mind struggled to control. "You're trembling," Damien whispered, pulling her closer. "I'm just cold," she lied. "You're a terrible liar," he replied, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know you better than you think, Valentina." The music ended, but they remained in each other's arms for a few seconds longer than necessary. When they finally separated, something in the air between them had shifted. Back in the apartment, the silence in the car was different, charged with a tension they both could feel but neither dared to name. Upon entering the penthouse, Valentina headed immediately for her room, needing distance. "Wait," Damien's voice stopped her in the hall. "There's something I have to tell you." She turned slowly, finding him much closer than she expected. She could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes, smell the faint, woodsy scent of his cologne. "This is working," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The board is convinced. Sebastian Lombard has withdrawn his claim on the company." "That's good," she replied, hyper-aware of their dangerous proximity. "But there's something that isn't working at all." Damien took another step, gently pinning her against the wall. "This agreement about not touching you, it's torture." Before she could respond, he leaned in, his lips perilously close to hers. For an instant, Valentina felt the urge to close her eyes and surrender to what her body was screaming for. Instead, she placed a firm hand on his chest, stopping him. "The agreement, Damien." Her voice betrayed her own internal conflict. "You promised to respect it." He pulled back immediately, running a hand through his hair in that frustrated gesture she knew so well. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight. "You're right." But his eyes said something else. They said he was reaching his breaking point, that the game they had started was becoming too real, too intense. "Good night, Valentina," he said finally, turning away. "Good night, Damien," she replied, quickly entering her room and closing the door behind her. Leaning against the door, her heart pounding, Valentina knew something was about to break. The facade, the self-imposed rules, or perhaps most dangerously, her own resolve to keep this relationship strictly professional. 5 more days. Just 5 more days and it would all be over. The problem was she was no longer sure she wanted it to end. The 6th day of their fake marriage coincided with an unavoidable business trip. An important tourism project in Charleston, South Carolina, required Damien's presence to sign the final agreements. As his wife and assistant, Valentina had to accompany him. "It will just be for a day," Damien explained as they boarded the company's private jet. "We'll sign the papers, tour the site, and be back in New York for dinner." The plan seemed simple. Fate had other ideas. They were flying over the Appalachian Mountains when the pilot announced that a tropical storm was approaching. Moments later, turbulence began to shake the aircraft. "Mr. Blackwood," the pilot's voice was tense over the intercom, "we're going to have to divert to Hilton Head Island. It's not safe to continue to Charleston in these conditions." Damien shared a look with Valentina. For the first time since she'd known him, she detected genuine concern in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing how she was gripping the armrests. "I'm not a fan of turbulence," Valentina admitted, trying to keep her composure. Without warning, Damien covered her hand with his. The gesture was so natural, so unexpectedly comforting, that she didn't pull away. They managed to land at a small regional airport, where they were informed that all flights were grounded. Tropical Storm Juliet had suddenly changed course, and meteorologists predicted it would hit the coast within hours. "What do we do now?" Valentina asked as they watched the rain intensify through the airport windows. "Find shelter," Damien replied, already dialing on his phone. "We won't be able to get back to the city until tomorrow at the earliest." After several calls, they secured transportation to a small boutique hotel on the outskirts of Hilton Head. By the time they arrived, the storm had unleashed its full fury. The wind howled through the trees on the property, and the palm trees bent dangerously under its assault. "Welcome to the Oceanfront Inn," the manager, an older man with a kind face, greeted them. "Fortunately, we have one room available." "One?" Valentina asked, tensing immediately. "It's the last one," the man confirmed. "The storm has brought in a lot of stranded travelers." Damien and Valentina exchanged glances. After all, they were supposed to be a married couple. Requesting separate rooms would seem odd. "We'll take the room," Damien decided, signing the register. The suite was beautiful. White walls, dark wood furniture, a covered terrace with a view of the raging ocean, and a single king-size bed in the center. "I'll sleep on the sofa," Damien offered immediately, setting his briefcase down by the window. Valentina nodded, a silent wave of gratitude washing over her for his respect of their agreement. She was organizing her few belongings for the night when the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the room into absolute darkness. "It was only a matter of time," Damien commented with a tone of weary resignation. The manager soon appeared with a handful of candles, apologizing profusely for the inconvenience. He informed them that the emergency generator would only power the common areas, and that they likely wouldn't have electricity until the storm passed, probably sometime the next day. By the trembling, dancing light of the candles, they shared a simple dinner that was brought up to their room. The roar of the storm outside, a constant percussive backdrop of wind and crashing waves, created a strange and unexpected bubble of intimacy. For the first time since their arrangement began, there was no one watching them, no audience to perform for, no board members to convince. It was just the two of them, suspended in time by the tempest. "Why did you accept this absurd deal?" Damien asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the storm's drone as he poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle the hotel had sent up. "You could have reported me for harassment. You could have just said no. You had other options." Valentina contemplated the question, her eyes fixed on the dark red liquid swaying in her glass, a miniature storm mirroring the one outside. The candlelight softened the sharp, professional lines of her face, revealing a pensiveness he hadn't seen before. "Perhaps because I understand what it means to fight for something you've built," she answered finally, her voice softer than usual. "My father left my mother and me when I was 8. He walked out and left her with nothing but debt and a half-finished diner in our small town in upstate New York." She paused, a flicker of surprise in her own eyes, as if she couldn't believe she was revealing something so deeply personal, so foundational to who she was. The candle flame reflected in her dark irises, making them gleam with unshed memories. "She worked herself to the bone to keep us afloat, to turn that diner into her own success. It wasn't just a business, it was her declaration of independence, her proof that she could survive and thrive without him. When she got sick last year, the medical bills piled up so fast. I swore to myself I wouldn't let all her years of sacrifice be for nothing." She took a slow sip of wine, the silence stretching between them, filled only by the howl of the wind. "I suppose, when you told me about the company, about the clause, I recognized that same fierce determination in you, that instinct to protect what's yours, what you've poured your life into." Damien watched her, his gaze holding a new kind of intensity. It felt as if he were seeing past the impeccable assistant, past the convenient wife, and into the very core of the woman sitting across from him. He saw the 8-year-old girl watching her father leave, the determined young woman sacrificing her own dreams, the loyal daughter fighting for her mother's legacy. "My mother died when I was 16, he revealed, his own voice dropping to a quieter, more vulnerable register that she had never heard. "My father was a charismatic importer, always traveling, always chasing the next big deal. They met on one of his trips to New Orleans where she lived. She was vibrant, full of life and music. He was captivated. He promised her the world, promised he'd come back, settle down, build a real family." He stopped, his gaze drifting to the dancing shadows the candles cast on the wall, as if the story were written there. But there was always one more trip, one more deal that couldn't wait. She waited for him every single time with a faith, a kind of hopeful blindness that I could never understand, he continued, the words coming slowly, as if dredged up from a place long sealed off. Until one day, she was waiting for him to come home, and her heart just stopped. The doctors called it an aneurysm, a sudden tragic event, but I always believed she died of longing, died waiting for a man who never truly understood her worth, who valued his ambition more than her love. A brilliant fork of lightning illuminated the room for a split second, stark and unforgiving, revealing a raw vulnerability on Damien's face that Valentina had never imagined possible. The flash was gone as quickly as it came, but the image was seared into her mind. "That's why I never allowed myself to get too involved," he concluded, the words barely a whisper above the storm. "My father destroyed my mother with broken promises. I never wanted to do that to anyone." The silence that followed was different from any they had shared before. It wasn't awkward or tense. It was profoundly intimate, a heavy, weighted quiet woven from shared pain and understanding. It was as if their souls, stripped bare by their confessions, had found a common language in the dark. "We're more alike than I thought," Valentina murmured, the statement hanging in the air like a fragile truth. In the gloom, Damien reached across the small table. With a gentleness that starkly contrasted with his usual commanding presence, he took her hand. This time the contact wasn't part of a performance for the public. There were no hidden clauses or unspoken expectations. It was real, vulnerable, human. Valentina didn't pull away. She allowed her fingers to intertwine with his, feeling a warmth spread through her that had little to do with physical desire. It was something deeper, something more terrifying in its sincerity, a sense of being seen, of being understood. After a few long moments, she gently withdrew her hand, the spell reluctantly broken. "We should try to get some sleep," she whispered, though she knew sleep would be a distant, impossible shore. "You're right," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He stood and moved toward his makeshift bed on the sofa, the space between them once again a physical reality, yet feeling smaller than ever before. The storm raged against the coast all night. Lying in the vast, unfamiliar bed, listening to the steady rhythm of Damien's breathing just a few feet away, Valentina understood that a fundamental tectonic shift had occurred between them. The desire was still there, a vibrant, humming undercurrent, but now it was interwoven with something far more potent, mutual recognition, a connection forged from similar wounds and fractured dreams. Damien, for his part, stared at the dark ceiling, the shadows playing tricks on his eyes. He was acutely aware of this woman whom he had intended to use as a convenient solution to a business problem. She had somehow, without him even noticing, become something he hadn't allowed into his life for over 2 decades. A possibility for something real. Neither of them slept that night. But in the heart of the storm, in their forced refuge from the world, they both discovered that what was growing between them could no longer pretend to be just a business arrangement. It was far more dangerous than that, and infinitely more valuable. The return to New York City marked a definitive before and after. The storm in Hilton Head had passed, but something far more powerful was brewing between Damien and Valentina. The confessions shared in that dark, candlelit hotel room had demolished invisible barriers, exposing a shared vulnerability that neither of them knew how to navigate in the bright, unforgiving light of their daily lives. In the office, they maintained their professional facade, but their interactions were now charged with a new kind of tension. It was no longer just about contained desire. Now there was complicity, shared secrets, and something perilously close to genuine intimacy. A glance across the boardroom held the memory of a shared past. A casual brush of hands while passing a document was laden with the weight of his confession and her understanding. The first crack in their carefully constructed equilibrium appeared during a charity gala at the New York Public Library. Valentina was engaged in a conversation with a few executives when she noticed Damien across the grand, vaulted room, surrounded by a small group of admirers. One of them, an elegant blonde woman in a glittering gown, was leaning a little too close to him as she spoke, her hand occasionally landing on his arm in a gesture of familiar intimacy. "Everything all right?" asked Javier Morales, one of the company's marketing managers, noticing her momentary distraction. His tone was kind, his eyes concerned. "Perfectly," Valentina replied, forcing her gaze away from the group, startled by the sharp, unexpected pang of jealousy that twisted in her gut. It was illogical, unprofessional, and utterly undeniable. Later, during the ride back to the penthouse, the silence in the limousine was heavy and thick. The city lights streaked past the windows, but neither of them seemed to notice. "You seemed quite entertained by Morales," Damien finally commented, his voice a study in feigned indifference. He stared out the window, but she could see the tight set of his jaw reflected in the glass. "And you seem very comfortable with Adriana Rivero," she retorted without thinking, the name of the blonde socialite spilling out before she could stop it. Their eyes met in the dim interior of the car, both of them surprised by the raw honesty of the exchange. A slow, knowing smile spread across Damien's face. "Are you jealous, Valentina Blackwood?" he asked, his voice a low, teasing rumble. "Of course not," she replied far too quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I'm merely concerned about the image we project. We're supposed to be newlyweds, remember?" "Oh, I remember perfectly." His voice had deepened, losing its teasing edge and taking on a husky intensity, every single minute of it. The following day brought new tensions to the surface. During a departmental meeting, Valentina laughed openly at a witty comment Javier made. From across the expansive conference room, Damien watched her, his brow furrowed into a dark line. He abruptly cut off the conversation he was having with the CFO. "Morales," he called out, his voice sharp enough to slice through the room's ambient chatter. "I need that report on the Southeastern campaign on my desk this afternoon. Not tomorrow." The manager nodded, startled by the sudden and uncharacteristic shift in his boss's mood. Valentina, however, recognized exactly what was happening. The startling realization that Damien Blackwood, the man who could buy half of Manhattan if he so chose, was jealous of a mid-level marketing manager, sparked a secret, illicit thrill of satisfaction within her. That evening, in the sterile perfection of the penthouse, the tension finally exploded. "What are you doing, Valentina?" Damien asked, his back to her, as he poured 2 glasses of whiskey at the bar. "What are you referring to?" she asked, accepting the glass he offered, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second too long. "You know exactly what I'm referring to." He took a sip of his drink, his amber eyes pinning her in place over the rim of the glass. "Morales is constantly buzzing around you like a fly, and you couldn't stop smiling at Adriana Rivero," she countered, her own voice sharp. They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with an electric charge. Finally, Damien let out a short, humorless laugh. "Look at us," he said, shaking his head with a sort of weary wonder, acting as if any of this is real. The words struck Valentina with the force of a physical blow, a cold dose of a truth she had been desperately trying to avoid. A significant, treacherous part of her wished with all her heart that it was. The 8th day of their marriage coincided with a crucial presentation to a group of foreign investors. Damien was outlining his vision for expanding Blackwood Holdings into international markets, his voice confident and commanding, when one of the investors raised a skeptical hand. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, your projections seem overly optimistic, especially considering the current volatility of the South American markets." Before Damien could formulate a response, Valentina intervened. With a poise and confidence that surprised everyone in the room, including herself, she projected a new set of slides and launched into a detailed analysis that supported every figure, every projection, every strategic assumption. "If you'll direct your attention to page 23 of your portfolios," she said, her voice clear and precise, "you will see that we have modeled 3 distinct scenarios, including a potential regional recession. Even in the worst-case scenario, the return on investment exceeds 12% annually, largely due to our diversified supply chain model and currency hedging strategies. Her passion as she defended the project, the sharp intelligence of her arguments, the way her eyes shone as she spoke of a future that she seemed to truly care about, Damien found he couldn't look away. He felt a wave of pride that went far beyond professional appreciation. It was an admiration that bordered on reverence. He wasn't watching his assistant, he was watching his partner. When the meeting concluded successfully, with the investors enthusiastically agreeing to move to the next phase of negotiations, the team celebrated discreetly in the boardroom. Valentina accepted congratulations from her colleagues, but her eyes instinctively searched the room for the approval of only one person. She found him leaning against the far wall, watching her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Let's go home," he said simply when their eyes met, the words carrying a weight that resonated deep within her. They walked toward the elevator together, wrapped in a silence thick with unspoken words. Their hands brushed occasionally, each brief contact sending a tiny jolt of electricity up her arm. The word home echoed in Valentina's mind. When had this luxurious, impersonal penthouse started to feel like a home? As they exited the Blackwood Tower, the late afternoon sun bathed Fifth Avenue in hues of gold and copper. They walked side by side, their steps falling into a natural, easy rhythm, their hands just millimeters apart, an invisible magnetic force pulling them closer. "You were brilliant today," Damien said finally, his voice low and sincere. "You didn't just save the meeting, you saved my vision." "It's a good project," she replied honestly. "I believe in it." They looked at each other, and for a long moment, words were unnecessary. "I believe in you," floated in the air between them, unspoken but perfectly understood. As they crossed the street towards the parking garage, Valentina's heel caught on a loose paving stone. She stumbled, a small gasp escaping her lips. In a flash, Damien's reflexes took over. His arm shot out, wrapping securely around her waist, pulling her flush against him and preventing her fall. Time seemed to freeze. Their faces were inches apart, their breaths mingling in the cool autumn air, their bodies perfectly aligned in an unplanned, electrifying embrace. Damien's gaze dropped to her lips, and for one heart-stopping moment, Valentina forgot every reason why this shouldn't happen. She forgot the agreement, the conditions, the deadline that was rapidly approaching. In that instant, there was only this man, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, his eyes promising so much more than just desire. But then, reality, cold and sharp, intruded. Gently, she pushed herself away from his arms. "The rule," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Damien let his hands fall slowly to his sides, a sad ghost of a smile touching his lips. "The rule," he repeated, the word sounding foreign and absurd on his tongue. They continued walking to the car, both acutely aware that the self-imposed barrier between them was crumbling with every hour they spent together. But they were also aware that only 2 days remained. 2 days before they had to decide if this had all been an elaborate business contract or the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for, but which, terrifyingly, neither now wanted to lose. Resisting was becoming harder every moment. Not just because the desire was a constant, pulsing reality, but because it was now entangled with something far more complex, feelings that had silently crept into their hearts, dismantling defenses built over a lifetime. And against that invasion, they had made no rules at all. Only 2 days remained until the decisive board meeting that would definitively confirm Damien as the CEO of Blackwood Holdings for the next 5 years. Everything had gone according to plan. The board was convinced of the solidity of his marriage, the foreign investors had signed the preliminary agreements, and Sebastian Lombard seemed to have accepted his defeat with an unexpected dignity. Too unexpected, Damien thought as he reviewed some documents in his office. Lombard's silence was unsettling for someone who knew his rival's relentless tenacity. As if summoned by his thoughts, Richard Vega, the company's chief legal counsel and Damien's close friend, entered the office without knocking. His grave expression signaled trouble. "We have a situation," he said, closing the door carefully behind him. "Lombard is making a move." "What are you talking about?" Damien put the documents down, his full attention fixed on Richard. "The waiter from the restaurant where you had that business dinner with Valentina," Richard explained. "Turns out he's the nephew of Lombard's personal assistant. He overheard enough of your conversation that night, the one where you strong-armed her into this, to know that this marriage is Convenient. An icy chill snaked down Damien's spine. That day in his office, when he had laid out the terms of the deal for Valentina, he had been explicit about the 10-day timeline, the clause, everything. "What exactly does he know?" he asked, his voice a mask of calm. "Enough," Richard replied grimly. "Lombard contacted me this morning. He wants a meeting tonight. He says he has proof your marriage is fraudulent and he's prepared to present it to the board unless you agree to sell him your controlling shares." Damien stood and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. His mind raced, analyzing options, calculating risks, searching for an escape route. "Set up the meeting," he decided finally, his voice firm. "The Gramercy Club, 8 o'clock, and make sure Valentina is there." When Valentina received Damien's call explaining the situation, a contradictory mix of emotions surged through her. On one hand, there was the sharp spike of panic at the thought of their charade being exposed. On the other, a profound and inexplicable disappointment, as if a part of her had begun to hope that this marriage, born of convenience and necessity, could somehow transform into something real. "I need you to be more convincing than you've ever been," Damien told her, as they prepared for the dinner in the penthouse. They moved around each other in their separate spheres, a physical distance that felt more artificial with each passing day. "Lombard is shrewd. He'll be looking for any crack in our story." Valentina nodded, fastening a simple jade necklace that complemented her emerald green dress. "And if he finds one?" she asked, meeting his gaze in the reflection of the bedroom mirror. Damien walked over, stopping just behind her, their eyes locked in the mirror. "Then I lose the company," he answered with a simplicity that stunned her. "But that doesn't scare me as much as it did 9 days ago." Something in his tone, a quiet sincerity, made Valentina's heart beat faster. Before she could decipher it, he had moved away, grabbing his car keys. The Gramercy Club, an exclusive restaurant housed in a restored Gilded Age mansion, was the picture of understated elegance. Sebastian Lombard was waiting for them in a private dining room, flanked by Richard and another man Valentina didn't recognize, but whose nervous fidgeting gave him away, the waiter, their informant. "Damien, Valentina, what a pleasure," Lombard greeted them, a smile playing on his lips that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "A charming couple. You almost look real." The dinner unfolded as a tense game of psychological chess, filled with veiled insinuations and loaded questions. Lombard, a man in his 50s with prematurely silver hair and the cool demeanor of a grandmaster, lobbed seemingly innocent queries designed to make them stumble. "Tell me, Valentina, how was the proposal?" he asked, as the main course was served. "I've always believed those moments reveal the true nature of a relationship." Valentina felt Damien's gaze on her. This was the moment of truth. "It wasn't what most people would expect," she began, her voice taking on an intimate, almost confessional tone. "There was no ring, no bended knee, no rehearsed romanticism." She took a sip of wine, buying a precious second to gather her thoughts. When she continued, there was a raw emotion in her voice that surprised even Damien. "We were in his office, arguing, as we often did." A genuine faint smile touched her lips. "Damien has this habit of running his hand through his hair when he's frustrated, you know? And he was frustrated that day, because I kept refusing to admit that what was between us was more than just physical attraction." She paused, looking directly at Damien, her eyes locking with his across the table. "So he just said it. No frills, no pretense. Marry me, Valentina." And I knew it was real because, for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear in his eyes. The fear that I would say no. The intensity of her gaze was not feigned. Neither was the slight tremor in her voice as she went on. "What makes our story special isn't how it began, but that we both had the courage to recognize that sometimes love shows up disguised as the very last thing you expect." A heavy silence descended on the table. Even Lombard seemed momentarily disarmed by the sheer force of sincerity radiating from her words. Damien, for his part, was looking at her as if seeing her for the very first time, because in a way he was. This wasn't the efficient, impenetrable assistant he had hired, nor the convenient wife he had contracted. This was Valentina, the woman who had quietly, irrevocably become essential to his existence. The rest of the dinner proceeded with Lombard on the defensive, his attacks losing their edge against the couple's apparent solidarity. When they finally parted ways, victory seemed assured. It was in the car on the way back to the penthouse that the facade finally shattered. Valentina, who had maintained her composure with such grace throughout the entire ordeal, broke down into silent, racking sobs. "What's wrong?" Damien asked, alarmed, pulling the car over to the side of a quiet street. "I can't do this anymore," she choked out between tears. "I can't keep pretending." "You were perfect," he tried to soothe her. "Lombard believed us, I'm sure of it." "You don't understand," her voice broke. "I wasn't pretending, Damien, that's what's destroying me." The confession hung in the air between them, both devastating and liberating. "Valentina," he began, instinctively reaching for her, but she flinched away, as confused and vulnerable as he had ever seen her. "Please don't," she pleaded. "I can't think straight when you're near me. I don't know what's real anymore and what's just part of the deal." Her words hit Damien with the force of a physical blow. For years, he had pursued corporate success with a singular, ruthless focus, convinced that nothing else mattered. He had played with emotions, manipulated situations, and viewed every relationship as a transaction. And now, looking at this woman weeping over the authenticity of feelings born in the most improbable of circumstances, he understood that he was on the verge of losing something infinitely more valuable than Blackwood Holdings. "I'm sorry," he murmured, the words feeling utterly inadequate to express the seismic shift occurring within him. For the first time in his adult life, Damien Blackwood considered the possibility of surrender, of letting go of the very thing he had fought so fiercely to protect. The company, the power, the control, none of it seemed to matter compared to the terrifying prospect of losing her. The heart, that rebellious organ he had kept under iron-fisted discipline for so long, was finally speaking louder than the cold, implacable logic of business. And its message was terrifyingly clear. Some prices were too high even for him. The morning of the 10th day dawned with a merciless clarity over New York City. From the penthouse window, Valentina watched the city awaken, clutching a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Last night had been the longest of her life, an endless stretch of darkness filled with reflection and painful decisions. Damien had left early, without a word. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Blackwood Tower. He would be there now, preparing the final details to secure his position as CEO. With deliberately slow movements, Valentina dressed in a sober black suit, as one would for a funeral. In a way, it was. It was the end of something that had never truly been given a chance to live. Once ready, she took one last look around the space that, for a brief, tumultuous period, had started to feel like home. When she arrived at the Blackwood Tower, she was met with the usual morning bustle. No one seemed aware that her entire world was fracturing. Head held high, she ignored the curious glances as she made her way to her desk. Damien's office was empty, as she'd expected. By now he would be on the 30th floor in the main boardroom at the meeting that would define the company's future, a future she would not be part of. With grim determination, Valentina began to empty her desk drawers. A photo of her mother, small trinkets accumulated over her months of work, a spare pair of shoes. She placed each item meticulously into a cardboard box she had brought for this purpose. "What are you doing?" Javier Morales asked, stopping by her desk with a confused expression. "I'm leaving," she replied simply, not pausing in her task. "Please let HR know my resignation letter is on its way." "But you're the boss's wife." The disbelief in his voice almost made her smile. If only he knew. "That's ending soon too," she murmured, more to herself than to him. She continued her work, ignoring the whispers that were beginning to spread through the open-plan office. The small cactus she kept by her monitor, the mug she used every day, a pen Damien had given her after a successful negotiation. Every object held a memory that now felt like a tiny shard of glass under her skin. She was placing the last folder in the box when a sudden, complete silence fell over the office. She looked up and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Damien was standing there in the middle of the common area, looking directly at her. He was dressed in an impeccable dark grey suit, ready for the most important meeting of his career, but his eyes reflected an inner tempest she had never witnessed before. "You should be at the meeting," Valentina said, her voice barely a whisper. Without a word, Damien started walking towards her. The entire office staff watched, their curiosity undisguised, but he seemed completely oblivious to them. In his world, there was only her. "What are you doing?" he asked, gesturing to the box filled with her belongings. "What was agreed upon?" she answered, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "Our deal ends today." The meeting will secure your position. You don't need me anymore." Damien's gaze moved from the box to her empty desk and finally back to her eyes. The raw intensity in them made Valentina hold her breath. "I didn't go to the meeting," he said simply. The words hung in the space between them, heavy with a meaning she didn't dare to interpret. "What? Why?" she finally managed to ask. "Because I understood something last night," he continued, taking another step closer. "Something that should have been obvious from the very beginning." He gently took her hands in his, completely ignoring the captive audience surrounding them. The contact sent a jolt through her entire body. "For years I believed this company was all that mattered." His voice was deep, achingly sincere. "I built my entire identity around success, power, control. I thought I needed Blackwood Holdings to be who I am." He paused, his thumbs tracing slow circles on her palms. "But these 10 days with you, they taught me something different. They taught me that there are things more valuable than a corporate empire. That there are connections that can't be manufactured or bought." Valentina could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. "What are you saying, Damien?" "I'm saying I resigned," he answered with astonishing calm. "I sent my letter this morning. Sebastian Lombard will take over as interim CEO until the board appoints a permanent replacement." A collective gasp swept through the office. Damien Blackwood, the man who had fought relentlessly for control, the ruthless strategist who never accepted defeat, had voluntarily given it all up. "Why would you do that?" she whispered, unable to process what she was hearing. Damien released her hands only to frame her face, his touch so gentle, so intimate, that the rest of the world seemed to melt away. "Because I choose you, Valentina," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "I would rather lose the company than lose you. I would rather start from scratch with you than continue alone, surrounded by everything I've built." Tears began to slide, unchecked, down Valentina's cheeks. "This wasn't part of the deal," she whispered. A breathtaking smile illuminated Damien's face. "Nothing I feel for you was ever in the contract," he replied. "I love you, Valentina Rossi. I love you in a way I never thought was possible. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Time seemed to stop. For one suspended moment, there were only the two of them, poised on the brink of a decision that would change their lives forever. "Our last rule," she began, her mind clinging to the remnants of their agreement. "To hell with the rules," he interrupted, leaning down to her. When their lips finally met, it was as if all the tension, the repressed desire, and the silenced feelings from the past 10 days erupted in a single moment of perfect, explosive communion. It wasn't a calculated or tentative kiss. It was deep, passionate, and blazing with a truth they could no longer deny. Valentina's arms wrapped around his neck, surrendering to what her heart had known long before her mind would admit it. This, however improbable, however unexpected, was real. All around them, the office staff erupted into applause and cheers, but they barely noticed. They were lost in their own world, in the staggering realization that sometimes the most profound love stories are born in the most unlikely of places and forged in the most adverse of circumstances. When they finally broke apart, breathless and emotional, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "What now?" Valentina asked, still reeling from the turn of events. "Now," he answered, softly kissing the tip of her nose. "We begin for real. No deadlines, no conditions, no pretenses. Just you and me building something that matters." And in that moment, standing in the middle of the company he had just abandoned, Damien Blackwood had never felt richer, more whole, or more alive. He had found the one thing money could never buy, a heart that beat in perfect time with his own. 6 months later, the Central Park Conservatory garden glowed under the warm October sun. Decorated with an exquisite but simple elegance, cascades of bougainvillea and wisteria created a natural path toward an impromptu altar beneath the shade of an ancient elm tree. There was no ostentation, no excess, only authentic beauty, just like the love they were celebrating. Valentina waited nervously in a small tent. Her dress was a masterpiece of simplicity, white silk that fell in clean lines to her feet, with delicate hand-stitched embroidery along the neckline that honored her family's heritage, and in her hands a bouquet of white calla lilies. Her mother, now fully recovered thanks to the treatments she had been able to afford, adjusted her veil with hands that trembled with emotion. "Who would have thought that job interview would lead to this?" her mother said with a knowing smile. Valentina laughed softly, remembering that first day in the Blackwood Tower, the first time she met those amber eyes that were now waiting for her at the altar. The path from that kiss in the office to this day had been one of discovery, redefinition, and rebuilding. Damien had shocked everyone by not only resigning as CEO, but also selling the majority of his shares in Blackwood Holdings. A new beginning requires liquidity, he had explained with a smile as he signed the papers. The music began to play, pulling her from her reverie. It was time. At the end of the flower-strewn path, Damien waited. There was no trace of the ruthless executive in his gaze, only a man made whole, transformed by a love he once tried to reduce to a contract. Beside him, Richard Vega stood as his best man, smiling, a privileged witness to his friend's profound transformation. When Valentina reached his side, Damien took her hands with a reverence that spoke of sincere adoration. There were no outside witnesses this time, no hidden agendas or deadlines to meet, just two people who had found in each other what no fortune could ever buy, a home in the shape of a person. The first time we got married, we signed papers. Damien began his vows, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Today I want to promise you something no legal document could ever contain. My heart, my loyalty, my entire life. I love you, Valentina, not for what you can give me or do for me, but for who you are, for how you make me a better man every single day. Tears flowed freely down Valentina's cheeks when it was her turn. I walked into your office looking for a job, she said, her voice a near whisper. I never imagined I would find love in the most unlikely place, hidden behind a facade of hardness that concealed the most extraordinary man I've ever known. I love you, Damien, and I promise to walk beside you in this new life we are building together, with the same honesty and courage that brought us here. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, there was no hesitation in their kiss. There were no more rules to break, only promises to keep. The reception was as intimate as the ceremony. Amid laughter and dancing, the new couple accepted congratulations not only for their union, but for the project they now shared. Damien Blackwood, the former corporate tycoon, had found a new purpose. With the capital from the sale of his shares, he had established the Futures Seed Foundation, a social enterprise dedicated to funding sustainable projects and providing microloans to female entrepreneurs in underserved communities. And at his side, as Director of Development, Valentina contributed her vision and compassion. The old Blackwood Tower, where their story began, was not lost in the transition. In a move that stunned the business world, Damien had negotiated its purchase with special conditions. The top floors now housed the Blackwood Institute for Women's Entrepreneurship, a free training center for women of all ages and backgrounds. 1 year later, one spring afternoon, Valentina stood in the doorway of a classroom, watching as Damien led a leadership workshop for a group of 20 young women from various rural communities. His hands moved with passion as he explained business concepts, his eyes lighting up as he listened to the innovative ideas the participants shared. Who would have thought the feared corporate shark would end up here? Richard murmured, having joined her in watching. I always knew there was more to him, Valentina replied, never taking her eyes off her husband. He just needed someone who wasn't afraid to show him that life is about more than power and control. When the class ended, the students surrounded Damien with questions and thanks. He answered with a patience and gentleness few would have attributed to him in his previous life. He looked up, found Valentina's eyes in the doorway, and his face broke into a smile reserved only for her. Later, walking back to their new home, a cozy apartment in Greenwich Village filled with books and plants, their clasped hands spoke of a deep, comfortable intimacy built day by day. I got the confirmation today, Valentina said, squeezing his hand gently. The program is expanding to Appalachia and the Mississippi Delta next semester. Perfect, he replied, stopping to kiss her briefly. Though we'll have to reorganize our travel schedule. Valentina raised an eyebrow. Because of this, Damien explained, placing a gentle hand on his wife's still flat stomach. I don't want our little traveler getting too tired. Valentina's smile lit up the entire street. The news confirmed only days ago still filled them with a mixture of awe and indescribable joy. A new life, born from a love that had bloomed on the most improbable ground. That night, wrapped in each other's arms in the quiet of their home, they looked toward the future with hope and gratitude. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was infinitely better. Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you? Damien murmured. stroking her hair. "I thought, she's different from all the others. I had no idea how right I was." She smiled against his chest, remembering the determined woman who had walked into that corporate tower, resolved to keep her heart guarded and her dignity intact. "And do you know what I thought?" she replied. "That you were exactly what everyone said you were. Cold, calculating, ruthless. I am so glad I was so completely wrong." The silence that followed was filled with kept promises and shared dreams. They were happy, not with the perfect, unreal happiness of fairy tales, but with the authentic joy that comes from growing together, from overcoming hardship, from choosing love over power. And as New York City settled into the night, two hearts beat as one, a quiet reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin exactly where we least expect them. 5 years later. The house in the Hamptons glowed in the late afternoon sun. Built with sustainable materials and designed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape, it was their perfect weekend refuge from the city. In the sprawling yard that sloped down to the ocean, Damien chased a 4-year-old girl who ran with the uninhibited joy of childhood. Lucia, with her untamable black curls and her father's amber eyes, shrieked with laughter as she dodged him, feigning terror as he roared like an imaginary monster. From the deck, Valentina watched the scene, her hand resting gently on her stomach, where their second child was growing. "I still can't believe how much he's changed," her cousin Elena commented, watching Damien lift a giggling Lucia high into the air. "I remember when the whole city trembled at the sound of his name." Valentina smiled. The 5 years since their wedding in the park had brought transformations no one could have predicted. Future's Seed Foundation had become an internationally recognized model for social enterprise. The Blackwood Institute had graduated over 1,000 female entrepreneurs. Damien, the former shark, was now a sought-after speaker on purpose-driven economics, and Valentina, who had once just wanted a good salary, now ran educational programs that had revolutionized business training for women in at-risk communities. "Mama, look!" Lucia yelled, running towards her with a fistful of wildflowers. "For the baby." Valentina accepted the bouquet with due solemnity, as Damien collapsed dramatically into a chair beside her. "Your daughter has more energy than the entire executive board of Blackwood Holdings combined," he joked. "Our daughter," Valentina corrected, lacing her fingers through his, "and she definitely inherited your stubbornness." Later that evening, after Lucia was asleep, Damien and Valentina stood on their bedroom balcony, watching the moon reflect on the calm ocean. "I got an interesting offer today," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Sebastian Lombard wants to form a partnership. Blackwood Holdings would fund the expansion of our programs into Central America." Valentina turned in his arms, surprised. "Lombard? The same one who nearly destroyed us?" Damien smiled wryly. "The very same. Apparently, his own daughter took one of your workshops last year and was inspired. He sees the value now." "The world works in strange ways," Valentina mused. "What did you tell him?" "I told him we'd think about it," he replied, kissing her forehead. "That we make these decisions together now." She leaned back against his chest. The years had taught them that their best decisions came from combining his strategic acumen with her social conscience. They were a team in every sense of the word. 5 years, she murmured. "If someone had told me on that first day that we would end up here, we would have had them fired for being delusional." Damien finished with a soft laugh before growing serious. "Do you regret any of it?" Valentina considered the question, the entire improbable journey. "Not for a second," she answered. "Every single step, even the painful ones, brought us here." What had begun as a cold business arrangement, a 10-day paper marriage, had transformed into the journey of a lifetime. And as the stars glittered over the ocean, Damien and Valentina understood that their true wealth wasn't in bank accounts or corporate towers. It was right there, in that moment of absolute peace, in the family they had created, in the lives they had changed, and in the love that, against all odds, continued to grow stronger with each passing day.